Can't make this crap up. It turns out that the Joint Special Operations University, run by the United States military, has decided to publish now a handbook for its students and for the public in general on overthrowing foreign governments. I have to say, it's kind of a nice surprise that something like this isn't classified for 50 years after it's being written, because it is nice to know what the military really thinks about its past endeavors and adventures in other countries. And of course, it's especially rich considering that there is so much outrage in this country right now over supposedly foreign governments meddling in our politics. It is just pure poetic brilliance that JSOC would publish a guide to overthrowing foreign governments and meddling in their politics at a time like this. And you know what? Nobody in the media will bat an eyelash. No one in, say, the pages of the New York Times or the Washington Post, if they even know that this handbook exists, and the PDF I'm going to link in the description. You can go read it yourself. This is public information. Those folks at the newspapers, if they know this exists, they would not bat an eyelash at it. They would not at all understand the irony of people getting upset that other governments are interfering in American politics, through buying Facebook ads or something, or whatever they accuse Russia of doing, while at the same time our military is publishing guides on how to interfere in international politics. And another nice thing is this short book, it's about 250 pages, is not just full of a priori theory on how someone should go about overthrowing a foreign government. They actually go over 47 different case studies in which the U.S. interfered in other countries' politics violently, and tries to weigh their relative successes and parse out what sort of strategies were the most successful, what level of force applied really seemed to do the best. Now, of course, I have a bit of a problem with the methodology of the study because it seems to me to be overtly positivist, when you're dealing with a social science, which I guess you would count overthrowing governments as something within the realm of the social sciences. You really can't use logical positivism, meaning where they just look at the data and say, okay, well, what strategy did we try here? And they say, let's say one of their categories they had was supporting a resistance movement, and another category was disrupting sort of domestic politics. And let's say that supporting the resistance was successful, 45% of the time, and the disruption was successful in their eyes, 35% of the time. They would say then that supporting resistance groups is, to some degree more successful than disrupting the established government, which really you can't, in a social science, you can't take those sorts of proportions and really gain any real meaning off of it. And also, there's so many other variables that you would have to control for that this really is useless to try and use the data to form your theory. You really need to reason through why, in each individual case, why these actions did or did not work out. For example, if supporting resistance worked in, say, Afghanistan, but not in Angola, in each individual case, you would have to reason why those strategies did and did not work in those cases. You really have to go on a case-by-case basis. Putting up a spreadsheet and just trying to tally out your successes and your failures is not going to tell you much. Now, this report focused on countries in which there were active resistance groups that the U.S. intervened to try to assist in some way, either through direct support or by disrupting the government, therefore giving the resistance an easier job of overthrowing them. So this would include cases such as the Bay of Pigs, in which the U.S. armed some Cuban expatriates to go and try and invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. But this would not include the 1953 Iranian coup, because there was apparently no real resistance there, and that was just a direct U.S.-sponsored coup. Probably then would also not include the coup in Chile in the early 70s, which, of course, in both of those cases, you had sort of a top-down regime change. You had elites conspiring to overthrow the leader. In the case of Chile, it was mostly the military. And in the case of Iran, you had, well, of course, the monarchy and supporters of the monarchy. And they, of course, received material support from the CIA, MI6, and British Petroleum. So those cases are not even included in this massive study of 47 countries. And frankly, I didn't even know that the U.S. was involved in 47 countries during the period of, it covers 1941 to 2003. So basically, there has to be some kind of bottom-up popular resistance in the country that the U.S. is looking to exploit to destabilize the central government. I haven't had time to comb through the entire report yet, but it seems to me like it'd be very interesting. I mean, again, the fact that something like this would be published publicly with no classification, a really welcome surprise. Because I'd much rather that these folks put their evil ideology out in public so that we can actually see it and critique it. Now, looking at this list, they decided to include a lot of cases. I would assume that these were like OSS ops back during World War II, which I don't really think of World War II when I think of, the U.S. overthrowing governments, but it does make sense because apparently what they were talking about were assisting the resistance groups to the Nazis and then later the Soviets after World War II. So a good chunk, like at least 1/3 of all of the cases studied in this report actually were during or directly after World War II. And this report, I feel like I should probably try and print it out or maybe go to a print shop and have it actually published and bound as like a nice little booklet, because this seems like such a convenient catalog of not an exhaustive list, but a decently sized list of the U.S. military bragging essentially about their various regime change operations over the latter half of the 20th century. Because I know most Americans don't really think about this stuff and don't really know that it goes on. I mean, I know that when I was growing up, and this is still the case for 99% of the people I know, when 9/11 happened, you just thought, hey, we were just sitting over here minding our own business, doing nothing, and then these guys just flew planes to the buildings. There was absolutely zero understanding of any context as to what motivated the folks in Al-Qaeda or why they hated us or anything. I mean, even George W. Bush tried to, his famous "they hate our freedom" speech. I mean, to me, I see if I'm able to achieve anything on YouTube, it's that I would like to alert my fellow Americans that there are actually reasons why America is hated around the world, and it's because of the actions of our government. I mean, it's pretty clear. Nobody likes a nosy neighbor. If you have somebody who's constantly meddling in your affairs, you're not going to like that person. And if it's the most powerful country in the history of the world, well, then you're definitely not going to like them either. I mean, even using the generous classification that this report has for whether an operation is considered a success or a failure, they still chalk up quite a few failures. I mean, the majority they still made sure to consider the majority successes, but there were a lot of failures in here. And just because something is in the success category doesn't mean that it was necessarily good in the long run for anybody, let alone the American people who are going to have to face the blowback and hatred from these sorts of nations. I mean, obviously the Iranians are still very upset about 1953, and that's even if you grant, what was his name? There was some U.S. official that was on TV a couple days ago, and he was asked about the 1953 Iran coup at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said, hey, the guy asked him the question, said, hey, is this a legitimate reason, perhaps, why you think the Iranians might hate us? And he said, well, they're a bunch of hypocrites because the religious establishment supported the coup in 1953. And I haven't had time to check him on that, but let's say that's true. Let's give him that 100%, that the mullahs were on the side of the Shah in 1953, because Mossadegh was a secularist. He wasn't an Islamist, so that seems plausible to me that they didn't like Mossadegh. That doesn't explain why the rest of the Iranian people who aren't the mullahs in charge chant death to America. It seems to me like the mullahs are just trying to be populist, so they're tapping into a popular hatred for the United States that is rooted in resentment of the 1953 coup. But anyway, I'm sure if we dig down, we could find plenty of cases like this in this report, and it's very juicy. So I would encourage you to try and pore over it some more yourself if you have any time. And until then, I'll keep an eye on the news, and if by tomorrow, I'm sure I'll have another video out, just like I do every day. So if you got anything of value from this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because, as I said, I will be uploading every day. I hope to see you folks the next time.